Hello, folks, and welcome back to another edition of the Cryptx LiveWire. Today is Monday, January 12th, and the new quarter is looking pretty bullish, at least from the start. Had a nice positive close to the first 5 days of January. So typically, some people like to use that as a barometer for what the rest of the year will do. But Bitcoin up a little bit today. Silver, obviously, the main story up around 6 to 7%. So a lot of interesting stuff to look over and some potential setups to go through. But Monty, good morning. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well, CJ, doing well. Like you said, silver really stealing the show today, making new all-time highs, and excited to hear you talk about that short squeeze and the positioning going on in that asset. But I want to talk today about Bitcoin, what's going on in Bitcoin. Ultimately, I'm encouraged by what we're seeing so far. And, let's just dive right into it. We talked about this a lot last week, but I think that the same thing rings true this week for what we talked about last week. And looking at this chart, we're seeing everything you'd want to see out of Bitcoin from a bullish perspective. It's maintaining this 20-period smooth moving average. And anytime price wicks down, it gets bought back up and we hover above this 90K level. So we've managed to flip 90K from resistance to support. You can see here, all instances where 90K was sold into very heavily. But now that we're above that level, you can see it's acting as support. Also, we have the 20-period smooth moving average turning up, acting as support as well, where this acted as resistance in the past here, and here. So now we have this as support as well. So seeing that, tells me that, now that we have this protection to the downside, you can get a little bit more aggressive with your longs. And one thing that supports that fact is the liquidation heat map. Now, looking at this right away, it doesn't necessarily scream any large bias, but there is still a bias that we can take away from this chart. Now, first and foremost, just looking at the red and green lines, that tells you how many shorts and how many longs are in the market. This is strictly on Binance, but Binance does see the most volume, so this tells a large part of the story. So you can see that there's more shorts in the market right now, approximately $37 million worth of shorts. But, looking at this chart, the one thing that stands out to me is the amount of 100x longs that we have below current price. So you can see the orange bars are 100x leverage. So those get liquidated with even just a small move to the upside. And we have them piled up right below 90K. So anywhere between 89,886 and 89.5, we have a lot of 100x shorts lined up. People speculating that if price does reach these levels, we're going to break down. Now, what I think might happen here is something similar to silver, where these shorts get liquidated by a move to the upside. Even just a slight move would liquidate these 100x shorts, and that would merely act as fuel to drive price higher. So you can see that right now, I like to look at when we're close to current price. I like to look at kind of where people are leaning for the day, and you can tell that based on the 100x longs, people are leaning to the upside, at least in the short term. But in the long term, we have lots of shorts down here that are set to be liquidated if price reaches up to about 92.5. So if we get price at 92.5, another $1,000 move to the upside, these shorts will get liquidated and price will go higher. So looking at that, I think that tells us everything we need to know. You'll see significant supply absorption as we head back down towards those levels. But ultimately right now, I think that the shorts that are speculating that price is going to break down below 90K, if we do see a positive move, some continuation here to the upside, and just a slight move to 92.5, those shorts will get liquidated and I think propel us above our previous swing high at 94 and drive us up into the 95, 96K range. So that's what we're looking at in terms of positioning from a liquidation standpoint. But ultimately, CJ, I think it's looking good for Bitcoin from a strictly positioning perspective, because right now there's a lot of people banking that price is going to dip below 90K, and we just haven't seen that yet. So now that we're getting this price stability above 90K and we're seeing spot pressure drive price up, I expect those shorts to get liquidated and price to go even higher as the day continues. So that's what I'm watching for today. I'll keep a close eye on that liquidation heat map for you guys and keep dropping it in Telegram as anything develops and as any liquidations occur. But right now, that's what I'm seeing for Bitcoin and the Bitcoin futures market.
Thanks, Monty. Appreciate that liquidation data. Yeah, the tape's looking a little bit better today on Bitcoin, although Friday was a little bit disappointing in terms of price closing red with equity markets making new all-time highs. But we'll see if Bitcoin can turn around here. I really enjoyed the positioning data you shared, but I also want to talk about the positioning data as it relates to Bitcoin in the COT.
Yes.
And so we'll go over that now.
Cool. We do have a question as well, actually. It just came in.
Oh, yeah. Bear flag on BTC.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on a bear flag on BTC?
I mean, at the time, I guess we could have said this was like some kind of bear flag. The tape was very heavy, but we failed to break down to critical lower levels as 80K or specifically 84K held as support. And the tape looks better now. So I'm just going to let the tape tell me what to do. I'm not going to necessarily predict a breakout or a breakdown or the both of a bull or bear flag. I just think that right now the tape is telling us, along with the equity market, that prices are continuing to drift higher. And like at the time, the tape was very heavy and risk off, but now we are bouncing and things are looking better. And in many historic cycles, even in the most bearish conditions like 2022, 2018, even after those periods of time when Bitcoin fell 25 to 30%, in each instance, we did see a reversion to the 200-day moving average, which right now is at about 106,000. So as of now, it seems that the bear flag is at least on pause, but we're still in a range. Like it's tough to say with a high conviction of certainty until we break one of these aspects of the range. But I will lean bullish from this perspective. Do you have anything to add to that, Monty?
No, I'd agree. I think right now the most important thing is the tape to look at, and then also the way people are positioned. And right now, the short stacking up below 90K, I think will act as fuel to the upside. So I wouldn't put too much credence in any of the technical formations right now. I think from a more, intermediate perspective, looking at the volume, looking at the price, looking at the levels of support and resistance, I think those kind of override the aspects of the bear flag, or even if there were a bull flag right now, I think that I would be putting more weight in the way people are positioned as we head into this move, as opposed to kind of technical formations.
Yeah, it is often difficult to tell the difference between accumulation and distribution when looking purely at technicals. That's why I think it's important to use the supplementary data, which is positioning, which is what I'm going to talk about right now. But yeah, moving to Bitcoin, let me pull up Bitcoin futures, because while positioning is getting a little bit more neutral. All right, CME, there we go. Okay, so in blue, right, as a reminder, we have large speculators over $100 million. In red, we have commercials. And in yellow, we have retail traders. As we can see over the past week, retail has cut their shorts a little bit and gotten a little bit more long. And what I like to see from my perspective when I'm interpreting this data is doing the opposite, essentially, of larger speculators. So for instance, when we look at the blue line here, it shows that speculators were accumulating throughout basically since July, and ever since then they've kind of given up on the move really since the start of December. So the fact that they're getting out of their longs shows me that that's kind of a favorable thing, because they're not max long, right? If price does look like it's going to trend back into the 200-day moving average, that actually allows the large speculators to then be able to go back in and chase and push price higher. And if we're already positioned long in that scenario, then we're essentially capturing the losses of the large speculators or their FOMO trades. Large speculators and commercials are really the ones, in my perspective, who drive significant market moves. It's not 100%, right? Not like anything, it's important to manage risk, but it is interesting to see that positioning data is now neutral, and trend following in neutral markets that aren't crowded is and has been a somewhat viable strategy. And that brings me to my next point, which is silver. Last week and a few weeks ago now, we've been talking about how the positioning data in silver has been somewhat unprecedented given where we are in terms of price action. So, like I said, those three entities in the previous Bitcoin example, we have large speculators in blue, and they are at a reading of 0, which means they are max short. And if we look at the raw indexed positioning data, large speculators, you can see, have been consistently selling for roughly the past month, ever since December 8th. And the fact that they are selling into new all-time highs, I remember this happened in earlier 2024 when the Nikkei was making new all-time highs, and the market just kept going higher until large speculators ultimately chased. The one thing I think is important to take note of in terms of last week's price movement, in terms of positioning, is that we now have retail specs max long at 100. And yes, retail speculators are oftentimes wrong, but in many cases, they make money during market bubbles and in times like 2021 and in times like 2000, but they don't keep it, right? So they can be right for a while, but ultimately, retail speculators usually don't keep it over the years. But what this means from a positioning perspective is that I like to compare it to positioning data in 2000. In 2000, Druckenmiller was a great example of this. He began shorting the market a little bit prematurely, but there were a lot of signs to validate, I guess, shorts, namely a massive influx of retail traders, valuations that didn't have really make any sense. But that market, interestingly enough, in 2000 did not top until large speculators chased the move and got max long. So that leads me to wonder, is that going to be the same in silver? Are we going to have to see large specs chase the move higher and really cover their shorts before we see any type of market top or consolidation phase in silver? So from a purely positioning perspective, there's really no reason to exit longs in silver in my mind. If I was going to exit longs based on positioning data in silver, I would wait till the large specs got back to 50, which is then neutral, right? And so the positioning edge in that trade is then kind of realized and done. But a very strong trend nonetheless. And that's kind of what I have to say about silver.
Good stuff, CJ. Yeah, big day for silver, and it looks like it could continue based on that positioning data. One other thing that you didn't really mention, but I think that stands out to me when looking at that positioning data, is the fact that the commercials have not started to distribute whatsoever. So I think that that gives a lot more weight to the retail and large specs kind of driving this market, because the commercials typically distribute during moves to the upside. We haven't seen any distribution from commercials. They're kind of diamond handing this move to the upside, which I think allows price to continue to go higher on these sort of short squeezes and just retail speculation, because ultimately we're not having that much sell pressure being put back onto the market from those commercial speculators. So that also I find very interesting in silver.
Like I said, very, very unprecedented. I have a couple stocks I'd like to talk about, but if there's anything else you'd like to hit, feel free, my friend. Floor is yours.
Yeah, let's just hit this question real quick. Is there another asset class you watch outside of cryptocurrencies that help guide you with direction of Bitcoin or Ethereum?
I would say generally in terms of like structuring trades, not necessarily, but obviously risk assets have a cyclical trend together. Many cases before I've felt like, Bitcoin's price action in relation to equities can tell you about the underlying strength of the asset class. So for instance, like there are rare examples, like in 2022, crypto in 2021 topped before the equity market because it is like the most risk on type thing. But it was actually one of the first to bottom too. We had equities falling lower and crypto was actually flat. I remember very distinctly with Monty, and we were watching this like, why isn't crypto down more if the equities are selling off, if the Qs are down like 2-3%? So that's can kind of be an underlying hint in terms of the strength relative to the correlations. But in terms of making singular trading decisions, I try to keep it to each individual market. Do you have any views on that, Monty?
Yeah, I would say, you can be a little more biased to the long side when we're making new highs in equity markets, just because of the nature of things and the influx of liquidity. You tend to see an increase in price in Bitcoin. But what I will say is the fact that we have seen such stark underperformance in the last few months, I think that sets up Bitcoin to actually have the potential to outperform in the upcoming months here, because of the fact that we've seen such underperformance, which has been kind of uncharacteristic of Bitcoin, where we've seen equity markets making new all-time highs and Bitcoin struggling to even see any signs of bullish price action and just grinding lower and lower. So now that we've seen that correlation kind of broken, I think it works in the other direction as well, where even if we do get negative equity price action, we could see some capital start flowing into Bitcoin, just based on the fact that that correlation has been somewhat broken over the last 6 months.
Yeah. You'd have to imagine it'd be difficult for Bitcoin to rally with equities negative, but let's let the tape tell us. We don't really need to predict this thing that all of these forecasters and gurus like won't tell you, is that you don't need to predict the market necessarily to make money. Like, we just have to find optimal setups where risk reward is optimal and execute properly and let the market take care of itself. So I'm not going to really force any predictions. Let's just wait till we get really good setups and let's see how the market plays out. Monty, is there anything you'd like to? I see you pulling up some news there.
Yeah. This is just news related to a certain asset that I wanted to talk about today. We talked about this last week, but I still think that it's worth mentioning today, and that is Zcash. But I want to start with this piece of news because I think that this is pretty important, and that is the fact that Zcash developers have left the electronic coin company to form a new firm. So the lead developer, the head developer, has stepped away from Zcash. So they need to bring on a new team to keep moving forward. So the team that has helped build this asset up to where it is has now stepped away to form a new firm. So from a fundamental perspective, that's definitely a red flag. I think that could lead to lower prices, but ultimately, I think that still the biggest red flag for this is the technicals. Now, we had a failure to reach previous swing highs here, which was indicative of the fact that we're running out of buyers at this level, at above the $500 level. Very few people were willing to step in, and that's exactly what we saw. Price got sold into above 500 and dipped back below the moving average. Now we are seeing a bit of a short squeeze today. Looking at the CoinGlass data, you can see that Zcash does have a pretty positive funding rate now. So it tells us that people are skewed to the downside. And essentially what this tells us is that if you want to get short, you have to pay a premium to the longs of 0.0074%. So there are a pretty significant amount of shorts in this right now, which is why price is moving to the upside as shorts get liquidated. But I think the mistake that a lot of traders are making is shorting this with too much leverage. They're expecting this to just break straight down. That isn't the case, even with completely broken assets where the head development team has stepped away, right? Price will still fluctuate, and price will still, if we get too widely diverged from the moving average, snap back to the moving average, just as a result of people's positioning. And I think with Zcash, that's definitely the case. So I think you're safe to short this one. I'm short 3x from about the moving average here. This is something we talked about in our Telegram group. If you missed that, you can check it out for free for 15 days at StickyTrades.com/Cryptx. But we share insights in there. And I really like the Zcash short trade setup just because, one, you have fundamental bearish news with the developer stepping away. Two, it outperformed Bitcoin significantly to the upside. So if we look at the Zcash Bitcoin chart, it looks pretty much the same. But ultimately, I like the idea of putting on a synthetic position of being long Bitcoin and short Zcash. So perhaps just going 3x long Bitcoin and 3x short Zcash, I think could be a very favorable trade as we enter this new year, because one, we have bearish fundamental news with the developers stepping away, but two, obviously some massive overperformance all throughout this period here. Now it's set to correct, and the question remains, who is going to buy this asset at current prices? I think there's going to be a lot more sellers than buyers, and we're going to see a pretty stark correction in Zcash. So I am currently 3x short Zcash. I'm riding this one to the downside, but I wouldn't short this one with too much leverage, because I think as this trade gets a little bit more crowded, you'll start to see bigger and bigger moves to the upside as shorts get liquidated, or as people just cover their positions and take profit. You'll see price kind of jump back to the upside. So still like that one to the downside. It's got a good technical setup, good fundamental setup, and I think it will ultimately give a lot back to Bitcoin over the next couple of months here. So that's what I'm looking at for Zcash, but that's all I got. So I'll pass it back to you, CJ.
Thanks, Monty. Yeah, it was interesting to see that big break like last week. Bitcoin was basically flat, didn't really move at all. And Zcash fell 8% or 9% in one day, a good indication of underlying weakness or just a lot of late, hands hoping for 1,000. But the market isn't really validating that idea right now. So,
yeah.
Okay, just a couple more stocks I want to talk about that have been on my radar. And first one is this idea. I don't like to get too fundamental in terms of trading, but I really think this story is quite compelling in terms of energy, powering AI, powering data centers. This is already a very consensus idea when it comes to things like nuclear and uranium. But where it's not a consensus idea, I don't think yet, it's starting to become one, but I don't see a lot of people in mainstream media and Twitter talking about like solar stocks. A lot of solar has been really beat down since, the Trump administration came in and they decided, they weren't going to support it initially or whatever. But I just watched this thing, Elon Musk talking about, potentially putting solar in space to power these data centers. I mean, it's above my understanding of the technology. But what is clear is that if solar is going to have a huge demand with AI changing the world, I mean, I think there are some things you could say that like this time really is different, and that doesn't mean we can't sell off 20% in the interim. But what I'm saying is that fundamentally, I think you'd have to imagine this would be really bullish for all different types of energy, but particularly renewables and alternative. And this is one stock I like called Fluence Energy Inc., FLNC. And it's really held up, even with the NASDAQ kind of trending and not really going anywhere over the last few months. And it's approaching a new all-time high breakout, or not an all-time high breakout, but, at least in the last few years. So this one is like, look, I'm not trying to impose my will or my idea on the market, but this energy idea is like very materially impactful in the world, and it's being reflected in the price action. And I don't see anyone talking about this stock really, except maybe a couple people on social media. It's relatively small, almost $4 billion in market cap, but not, a massive company yet by any stretch of the imagination. So I think that's kind of one to look at for a potential breakout and a fundamental story that is playing out and is continuing to play out. So just one there. I mean, we do have a little bit of drop in volume, but it's trending with continuation. The other one is one that we have talked about in terms of, if you were to read the description of this company, IREN, vertically integrated data center business, powering the future of Bitcoin, AI, and renewable energy. I mean, that sounds like the dream AI company to me. But who cares what I think, right? The market is telling us that price is bullish, and we are testing kind of a inverse head and shoulders pattern where if we have sustainable closes above this blue box level, I think it's reasonable to look for a retest of all-time highs here if the stock market's going to continue to trend. So just a couple stocks there with continuation. The patterns have been very, very strong, and until the market kind of disagrees, I'm not going to yell or argue with the tape. Like, those seem to be working well right now. So that's what I have to say about those.
Yeah, good stuff, CJ. Thanks for bringing those to our attention. Obviously, we've talked about iron in the past, but I really like the solar play. I think a lot of people look at the bottlenecks of AI technology and they think server space, or they think, processing power. But ultimately, if you go as far downstream as you can go, the biggest and most important element that's powering this underlying move is energy. And I think that any interesting plays in that space could be very profitable this year as it continues to be the fuel that lights the fire of AI. So I like that play a lot. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. But I think that is all we got for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, you can get a 15-day free trial of Cryptx at stickytrades.com/Cryptx. We have a Telegram group that's open 24/7. If you got anything you want to talk about, any questions you want to ask, or anything you just feel like sharing, that's a place to do so. We also publish trade insights and weekly market reports that are available to our members only. So definitely check out stickytrades.com/Cryptx. Free 15-day trial, no credit card required or anything like that. Just sign up and get free 15-day access. But thanks so much for watching today. CJ, I'll pass it back to you for the final word.
Thanks. Hope everybody's having a good day out there, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.